I have told this story badly for 11 years, because for 11 years I told it as a man who had lost. Tonight I mean to tell it properly, as a man who watched something rarer than his own happiness, and had the wit at the last to be glad of it. You will want the Duke in it early. Everyone always does. But the story is hers, and it begins with her, and it begins with the two sentences that no one in that room ever forgot. "You are mistaken, Your Grace," she said, "and you are mistaken again." I was standing near the pillared arch of the Thessaly rooms with a glass of warm ratafia going warmer in my hand, and I remember thinking, with the particular despair of a man in love, that she had just ended herself. There is no gentler way to say it. A dowerless woman of 26, in a made-over gown 2 seasons old, had just contradicted the Duke of Ravensmere in front of 40 of the most poisonous tongues in England. And not once, which might be forgiven as nerves, but twice cleanly, the second time with a small courteous smile that made the first sound deliberate. The room did the thing rooms do. It drew a breath and held it. I had known Verity Chase since we were children in the same green corner of Somerset, she the squire's clever daughter and I the solicitor's son who followed her about like a spaniel and never quite stopped. I knew the smile. It was not defiance. Defiance would have been safer because defiance the ton understands and forgives in a pretty girl. This was worse. This was accuracy. She had listened to the most feared man in London deliver an opinion, found it wanting in 2 places, and told him so the way she might have told me I had misremembered the date of the harvest fair, as a kindness, so that I should not go on being wrong. Let me give you the Duke as he was that night, before any of this softened him, so you understand what she had done. They called him the Winter Duke, and the name had nothing to do with the season and everything to do with the temperature of his regard. Julian, 8th of that line, master of Ravensmere and of 4 lesser estates and of a great deal of London by virtue of simply being able to end you at a dinner table. He was not loud. That was the terror of him. Loud men wear out. Ravensmere would sit through an entire evening saying almost nothing, and then, when some ambitious fellow overreached, bragged of a horse, a marriage, a cleverness, the Duke would set down his glass and say one sentence, quiet as a closing door, and the man would find in the morning that his invitations had thinned, his creditors had grown attentive, and the story of him that London had decided to tell was not the story he would have chosen. He did not raise his voice because he had never in his life needed to. He was tall, dark, close on 40, with a face that would have been handsome if it had ever consented to be moved, and he moved through the season's crush like a blade through water. Nothing touched him, nothing slowed him, and he left no ripple you could name, only the cold. And they had all decided he was choosing a wife. That was why the mothers had brought their daughters out in such force that year. The Winter Duke had let it be known, in his glacial way, that he supposed he must eventually get an heir, and half the drawing-rooms of London had reorganized themselves around the supposing. Lady Clarissa Vane was the favorite, beautiful in the finished, lacquered way that beauty is when it has never once been surprised, and she stood near him now, watching Verity with the fixed, delighted attention of a woman watching a rival step off a cliff. The subject, God help us, had been a book, a traveler's account of the Levant that half the room had pretended to read. The Duke had made an observation about a river and a battle, delivered as fact because everything he said was delivered as fact, and Verity, who actually had read the wretched thing twice, because she read everything twice and had nothing but time and a lending subscription, had said mildly that the river he named ran the other way, and the battle he placed there had been fought a good 60 miles south, and here was the page if he cared to see it. He had not cared to see it. He had said, with the faint contempt he used on anyone who forgot to be afraid of him, "I think you will find, madam, that I am not often corrected." And that was when she said it. "You are mistaken, Your Grace, and you are mistaken again." The second mistake being the belief that not often corrected was the same as not often wrong. I wanted to cross the room and take her arm and walk her out into the night before the Tun could close its teeth on her. I did not. One does not, at the Thessaly rooms, and besides, I had learned long ago that Verity Chase did not care to be rescued, having been raised by a father who taught her that a woman with no money had better have a spine, since it was the only thing no one could take from her without her leave. The Duke looked at her. I have wondered since what he saw. I think he saw, for the first time in a very long time, a person who was not performing for him, not flattering, not fearing, not angling. She was simply, maddeningly, correct and unafraid, and dressed in a gown that told him she had nothing to lose, which is a thing a man of his kind almost never encounters, because everyone who comes near such men has already calculated what they might gain. There was nothing to calculate in Verity. She had no dowry, no connection worth the nomming, no beauty of the fashionable sort, a plain, quick, clear-eyed face, and a mouth that curved when it ought to have trembled. And she had corrected him because he was wrong, and for no other reason in the world. He said at last, "You have read it, then?" "Twice," she said. "It is not good enough to read only once, and not good enough to be believed at all where it touches on the campaign. The author was never within 100 miles of the places he describes with such confidence." A small pause, delicate as a dropped glove. One does meet that failing. The room understood her, even if the Duke chose not to. She had just told the most confident man in England, to his face, in front of the woman he was expected to marry, that confidence and correctness were not the same article, and that he had confused them. Lady Clarissa laughed, a light, killing little laugh, the laugh of a woman ringing the bell on a bout she believes already won. "How singular," she said, "to be lectured on travel by a lady who has never left Somerset." And Verity turned to her unhurried and said, "One need not have drowned to know which way a river runs, Lady Clarissa. One need only read the map correctly. It is a small skill, but it wears well." I confess I laughed. I could not help it. It came out of me like a cough, and I turned it into one and failed, and stood there scarlet while the whole poisonous edifice of the Thessaly rooms swayed on the edge of scandal. A dowerless nobody had just bettered the season's beauty and corrected the season's terror inside of 2 minutes, and every soul present knew that such things are not permitted, and were waiting, leaning toward it, hungry, for the Winter Duke to do what the Winter Duke did, which was to select the one sentence that would end her. He said nothing. That was the first strange thing. He looked at Verity Chase a moment longer than was comfortable for any of us, and then he inclined his head the smallest motion, a quarter of a bow, and said, 60 miles south. I shall look at the page." And he turned and walked away and left the room to make of it what it could. Do you understand how extraordinary that was? He had not crushed her. He had conceded. The Winter Duke, who had reduced a member of Parliament to selling his hunters with a single remark about ambition, had bowed his head a quarter of an inch to a spinster in a 2-year-old gown and admitted he would look at the page. The Tun did not know what to do with it. Half of them decided she was ruined anyway for the impertinence. The other half decided, more shrewdly, that something had happened that they did not yet have a name for, and that they had better watch. I got her out soon after on the pretext of finding her godmother, and in the carriage, old Lady Becksworth's shabby, kind carriage, I said, "Verity, do you know what you have done?" "I have told a man he was wrong about a river," she said, tucking her hands into her sleeves against the cold. "If England collapses under the weight of it, Edmund, I shall be very surprised. He could ruin you with a word. Then he is welcome to try. I have no fortune for him to ruin, no reputation the fashionable would trouble to spoil, and no expectation of being asked back to the Thessaly rooms in any case." She looked out at the wet lamps sliding by. "I am here because Lady Becksworth loved my mother and cannot bear that I shall die a poor relation without one London season to remember. I did not come to be married, Edmund. No one is going to marry me. I came to see the pictures at Somerset House and the lions at the Exchange, and to eat one ice at Gunter's, and I am not going to spend the whole of it being frightened of a duke, because it is the fashion. I loved her so much in that moment that I could not speak. I had come to London for one reason, and it was sitting across from me in the dark being brave, and I knew, I had always half known, that she thought of me as she thought of the green corner of Somerset itself, dear and permanent, and never once as a man she might choose. And I had told myself, all the long way up the Bath Road, that the season would change it. That in the crush and the candlelight she would look at me and see, at last, the thing I had been holding out to her since we were children. I want to be honest, because this is the last time I mean to tell this story, and I would like to tell it true. She never did see it. And the reason she never did, the whole reason, had just bowed his head a quarter of an inch and walked out of the Thessaly rooms. But I run ahead. Let me give you the season the way it came. He looked at the page. That was the thing none of us expected, least of all Verity. 3 days after the Thessaly rooms, a footman in the Ravensmere livery, dove grey and silver, unmistakable, came to Lady Bexworth's modest door in Half Moon Street and left, without a word of explanation, a slim parcel. Inside was the traveller's book and a single sheet of heavy paper, and on the sheet, in a hand as cold and clear as the man himself, 4 lines. That he had looked, that the river ran as she said, that the battle was fought 61 miles south, not 60, and he trusted she would forgive the correction, and that he remained her servant, Ravensmere. 61, not 60. He had gone and checked and found her 1 mile out, and could not resist telling her. Verity read it twice, of course she read it twice, and then she laughed, the real laugh, the one that started somewhere low and surprised even her, and she said, "Oh, he is horrid. Edmund, he is perfectly horrid," and I heard in it, though I did not want to, the particular delight of a mind that has been lonely a long while and has just been answered. I should have known then. I think I did know. A man does not check the mile. A cold man, a finished man, a man who has decided the world holds nothing he has not already weighed, that man does not go to his library at midnight to confirm whether a battle was fought 60 miles south or 61, and then trouble to write it out, unless something in him has woken and is casting about, half affronted and wholly alive, for the person who woke it. They met next in Hyde Park, and I was there, walking with them, which tells you something of the fool I was and the friend I was, both at once. It was one of those bright, brittle mornings when the whole of fashionable London contrives to be seen on the same stretch of gravel. Verity walked because she liked to walk, and because a hired horse was beyond Lady Bexworth's purse, and she wore the same gown and the same straight back, and she was, I saw with a pang, entirely herself among all those mounted, gleaming people, neither ashamed nor pretending. The Duke came upon us near the water. He was on a great black horse that would have frightened a braver man than I, and he drew rein and looked down at her and said, "No greeting, no weather, nothing that the ton would have recognized as an opening. You were right about the campaign. You were wrong about the author. He was within 100 miles. He was within 20. He simply chose to lie, which is worse than ignorance, and I find I dislike him more for the honesty of his dishonesty." And Verity, shading her eyes to look up at him, said, "Then we agree the book is bad. We differ only on the reason. I call it laziness. You call it lying. It is a nice distinction, your grace, and I dare say it tells more about the two of us than about the book." "Yes," he said, "I dare say it does." And there was something in the way he said it, a kind of arrested attention, the look of a man who has been walking a familiar road for years and has just noticed with a jolt that there is a door in the wall he never saw before, that made my heart go down in me like a stone. They talked for a quarter of an hour, there by the water, while I held Verity's shawl, and Lady Clarissa's party came past twice, slowing each time, and the whole park revised its estimate of what was occurring. They talked of the book, and then of another book, and then of a thing the Duke said about grief, in passing, that I did not understand, and Verity clearly did, because she went quiet, and then answered him gently, and he looked at her as though she had done something remarkable, which perhaps she had. And when he rode on at last, he said, to her and not to me, "You are staying in Half Moon Street." It was not a question, he had found out. I am giving a masquerade at Ravensmere House on the 20th. You will come. And he was gone before she could refuse, which she would have out of pride, and which he knew she would, which was why he did not give her the chance. I said, walking home, "You will not go." "I have nothing to wear to a masquerade," she said, which was not the same as "I will not go," and we both heard it. I want to be fair to her across all these years, so let me say the thing I did not let myself see then. It was not his rank that drew her, nor his money, nor even, I think, the strange dark handsomeness of him. Verity Chase had lived 26 years being the cleverest person in every room she entered, and having no one to be clever with. Her father had been a warm, quick man, and when he died the quickness went out of her days, and she had spent the years since among people who found her either alarming or dull, and never once found her equal. And here, at the far end of a season she had come to only for the pictures and the lions and the one ice at Gunter's, was a man who checked the mile, who wrote to tell her she was 60 and not 61, who disliked a liar for the honesty of his dishonesty. She had gone 20 years without a single conversation that answered her, and she was starving, and did not know it, until Ravensmere set food in front of her. That is a thing money cannot buy and beauty cannot compel, and it is the thing that beat me. I could love her. I did love her better and longer than he ever would if love is measured in years. But I could not answer her. I had followed her mind about like a spaniel all my life without ever once running beside it, and he ran beside it from the first sentence, and she knew the difference, and so, to my sorrow, did I. She went to the masquerade. Lady Bexworth found the money somewhere, God knows where, for a domino of dark green silk and a plain silver half-mask, and Verity went, and I went, because I could not bear to and could not bear not to, and Ravensmere House swallowed us into 1,000 candles and a crush of dominoes, and I lost her within the first 10 minutes, as I suppose he had intended. I found her again near midnight, on a stone terrace above the dark gardens, and she was not alone, and I stopped in the doorway and did the shabbiest thing I have ever done, which was to stand in the shadow and listen, because I could not make my feet carry me away from the sound of her being happy with someone else. He had taken off his mask. That was the first thing. The Winter Duke, at his own masquerade, had removed the one disguise he had worn all his life and set it on the balustrade, and stood there barefaced in the candlelight leaking from the ballroom, which for him was a nakedness more complete than any of us could imagine. And she had lowered hers, and they were talking the way people talk when they have forgotten to be watched. "Because you are the only person in England who has never once been afraid of me," he was saying low, "and I confess I do not know what to do with it. I have arranged my whole life so that people should be afraid. It is efficient. It is quiet. It keeps them at the distance I prefer. And you walk straight through it as though it were not there, and correct my rivers, and I find I have been cold for a very long time and had begun to call it peace." Verity was quiet a moment. Then she said, "May I tell you something, your grace, that you will not like?" "I find I want you to tell me things I will not like. It is a novel sensation. Pray continue." "You are not feared because you are strong," she said. "You are feared because you have decided that to bend, ever on anything, is to be weak, and so you never bend and you call it strength, and it is not. It is fear. It is the most frightened way of living I have ever seen. A strong man can afford to be wrong about a river and laugh, and thank the person who set him right. You cannot. You wrote to me over 1 mile because you could not bear to concede the whole page. You had to find your own small correction to make first, so that the surrender should not be complete. I saw it the moment I read your letter. You are a man who has never in his life said the 3 words that would cost him something, and you have built a duchy and a reputation, and a whole armor of winter around the not saying of them." I held my breath in the doorway. I thought every instinct I had told me that now, the Winter Duke would freeze her out at last, that she had gone too near the quick, and he would say the sentence and it would be over. He was silent for a long time. The candlelight moved on his face, and then he said very low, What are the 3 words? And Verity, gently, so gently, God help me, that I understood in that instant that she was already halfway to loving him, said, I was wrong. He did not answer. He turned and looked out over the dark gardens, and his hands were flat on the cold stone of the balustrade, and I saw, even from the doorway, that something in the man was in agony, some old wound she had put her clean finger on without knowing it was there, and I did not understand it yet, and neither did she. But I felt the shape of it in the room like a cold draught, and I stepped back into the shadow and left them there, and went home alone through the wet streets, and that was the night I stopped pretending, even to myself, that the season would change anything. Because it had changed everything, only not for me. The thing she had put her finger on came out into the light 3 weeks later, and it came out cruelly, as such things do, in the middle of a crowded evening, and it very nearly ended them both. You will remember I told you the Duke had a reputation for ruin. There was one ruin above all others that London kept as a kind of legend of him, the way people keep a story of a hanging, with a shiver and a lowered voice, and a certain awful relish. 11 years before, when Ravensmere was a young man newly come to the title, he had destroyed a gentleman named Gideon Harcourt. I will tell you the Ton's version first, because it is the version Verity had grown up hearing, and it is the version that mattered. Harcourt had been a warm, disorganized, generous man, a scholar of no fortune who had married a little money and spent it on other people's children, sponsoring this boy's schooling and that girl's music, standing surety for a friend, endowing a small library in a town that had never had one. He had done young Ravensmere some slight. The Ton disagreed on what. Some said a debt unpaid, some said a word said in company, some said Harcourt had simply been careless of the new Duke's dignity in a way the new Duke, raw and proud and grieving his father, could not forgive. And Ravensmere had answered the slight the way he answered everything, with one quiet, deliberate, comprehensive sentence in the right ear at the right dinner, and within a 12-month Gideon Harcourt was ruined. His credit gone, his surety called, his name attached to a whisper that no one would repeat and no one would deny. He lost the little he had. He lost the friends who had let him stand surety for them. He died 3 years later in cheap lodgings in a northern town, of nothing in particular, which is to say of the slow subtraction of everything that had made him a man, and the young Duke had never, in all the years since, said one word of regret. When asked, for people did ask in the early years, being shocked, he had said only, I do not forgive. Forgiveness is a lie people tell themselves to avoid the labor of judgment. I judged him correctly. I would do it again. And he had believed it. That was the marrow of the Winter Duke. Not that he had done a cruel thing young, but that he had spent 11 years being proud of it. Now, here is what London did not know, and what I did not know, and what came out that crowded evening like a blade coming out of a sheath. Gideon Harcourt was the man who had paid for Verity Chase's schooling. When her father died, the warm, quick squire, all his warmth and quickness and none of his sense about money, he had left Verity 13 years old and all but penniless, and it was Harcourt, her father's dearest friend from their own school days, who had quietly taken up the cost of her education, her books, her small allowance, the roof over her head in the years before Lady Bexworth. Harcourt had been her benefactor, her second father, the one steady, generous hand over her whole orphaned girlhood, and Harcourt had been ruined and driven to a cheap northern grave by the very man who had, 3 weeks past, stood barefaced at his own masquerade and asked her what the 3 words were. She had known who he was from the very first night at the Thessaly Rooms. She had known when she corrected his river. She had known when she read his letter and laughed and called him horrid. She had known at the masquerade. She had walked toward the Winter Duke of Ravensmere with her eyes wide open, knowing he was the man who had killed Gideon Harcourt by inches, and she had let herself begin to love him anyway, and it had been eating at her the whole while, the guilt of it, the wrongness, and she had told no one, not even me. It came out because Lady Clarissa Vane made it come out. She had watched the season turn, watched the winter Duke thaw before a nobody, watched her own beautiful lacquered future crack down the middle, and she had done what the beaten do, she had gone digging. She had found some old connection of Harcourt's, some ancient letter or servant's memory, and she had put it together. And at Lady Danvers's rout, in the largest and most crowded drawing-room of the season, with the Duke standing not 10 feet off, she had said it, loud and bright and killing, into a lull. "But how romantic," she said, "that the Duke of Ravensmere should be so taken with Miss Chase. When one considers that his Grace is the man who ruined poor Mr. Harcourt, Miss Chase's own guardian, was he not? The very gentleman who raised her and paid for her and died in a garret for his trouble. One does wonder, Miss Chase, how you bear his company at all. Unless, of course, the title has proved a wonderful cure for a long memory." The room went silent the way rooms do, and I watched the Duke's face and I watched Verity's, and I will tell you which was worse. The Duke's face went white, not the cold white of his usual composure, but a white with something under it, a man struck in an old wound he had spent 11 years pretending was healed. He looked at Verity as though the floor had opened. Harcourt, her guardian, he had not known. Whatever else he was, in that instant I saw that he had not known, that he had been falling toward this woman for a whole season without the faintest idea that the man he had destroyed and refused to regret was the man who had made her, and the knowledge of it went into him like a spike. But Verity's face was worse, because Verity's face did not break. It set. All the warmth of the season, all the answered gladness of the past weeks went out of it, and what was left was the girl who had sat in the carriage and said a woman with no money had better have a spine. She looked at Lady Clarissa, and she looked at the whole avid silent room, and then she looked at the Duke, and she said, clearly so that every soul present heard it, "It is quite true. Mr. Harcourt raised me. He paid for the books I corrected his Grace out of. He was the best man I ever knew, and this gentleman killed him for a slight and has been proud of it for 11 years. She was very calm. That was the terrible thing. You need not wonder how I bear his company, Lady Clarissa. I bear it because I forgot for a little while to hate him, because he checks the mile and answers when I speak, and I have been lonely a long time. It was a weakness. I am obliged to you for curing it." And she turned and walked out of Lady Danvers's rout with her head up and her back straight, through the whole silent, poisonous crush of them. And I went after her, and behind me I heard nothing at all from the Winter Duke, who for the first time in 11 years had been told the truth in public, and had not one cold sentence with which to answer it. She would not speak in the carriage. She sat with her hands folded and her face turned to the window and the tears running down without a sound, and I did not touch her, because there are griefs that a touch only makes worse, and this was one. Only at the door of Half Moon Street, with her hand on the cold iron rail, did she say, not to me exactly, "He never even said he was sorry. In 11 years. He was proud of it, Edmund." I asked him what the 3 words were, and I meant to make him say them for a river. I did not know I was standing in front of the man who owed them to Gideon and never paid. And she went in and left me on the step in the dark, and I stood there a long while, a man who had loved her all his life and would have given the world to comfort her, and could not, because the only comfort she wanted was owed her by another man. And I did not think, I truly did not think, that night, that the Winter Duke of Ravensmere had it in him to pay. I was wrong. It is the theme of this story, I find, that we were all of us wrong about what a man may be brought to do, and it is why I have come in my old age to hold the whole affair as a kind of miracle, though a plain, unshowy English sort of miracle, done in a drawing-room in a good coat, before people who did not deserve to see it. For 4 days there was nothing. London talked, of course. London did nothing else, and the talk went against Verity, as talk always goes against the poor. A dowerless spinster had reached above herself, had presumed on the Duke's fancy, and had now been publicly exposed as a fortune-hunter nursing a grudge. That was the story the Ton chose, because it was the comfortable story, the one that put everyone back in their proper place. Invitations that had trickled toward Half Moon Street on the strength of the Duke's interest dried up overnight. Lady Bexworth, poor loyal soul, wept with rage and could do nothing. Verity did what she always did, which was to keep her spine and say very little and go, that fourth day, to see the pictures at Somerset House at last, because she had come to London for the pictures and would not let the ton cheat her of them. And on the fifth day the whole thing came to its head, at the largest assembly of the whole season, the great subscription ball at the Thessaly Rooms, the same rooms where she had corrected his river, which I do not think was an accident, though I could never prove it. Everyone was there. Everyone. The season was near its end, and the great ball drew all of them, and the air was thick with the one question London had been asking for 5 days. What would the Winter Duke do? For here, you understand, was the perfect occasion for the thing he was famous for. A woman had insulted him in public, had called him a murderer to his face before the whole ton, had walked out on him, and here she was, come to the great ball on old Lady Bexworth's arm because she would not hide, and here he was, and all of London leaned in, hungry, certain, to watch the Winter Duke do what the Winter Duke always did and end her. It was expected. It was, in a sense, owed. He had a reputation to keep, and the keeping of it required, that night, one quiet sentence to finish Verity Chase, and every soul in the Thessaly Rooms was waiting for it with the awful relish of people watching a hanging. I was near her. I had appointed myself in my useless way her guard, though there was nothing I could guard her from, and I watched the Duke come in. He came in alone. That was the first strange thing. He had shed Lady Clarissa entirely and the fashionable knot of people who usually orbited him, and he came in alone, and he looked, I thought, ill or not ill, but altered the way a landscape is altered after weather, the same hills and a different light on them. He was pale, and there was something gone out of his face and something else come into it, and he did not look for Verity at once. He stood a moment inside the door, and the whole room turned toward him and hushed and waited for the blade. And the Duke of Ravensmere walked to the middle of the floor, not to Verity, to the middle, where the light of the great chandelier fell hardest and every eye could reach him, and he stopped there, and he did a thing no one in that room had ever seen him do or ever expected to see. He waited until the music had died and the last murmur had gone still, and he waited a moment longer, so that the silence should be complete and belong to him, and then he spoke, not quietly, not in the deadly undertone he used for ruin, but clearly, so that it carried to the farthest corner, so that no one could later pretend they had not heard. 11 years ago, he said, I destroyed a man named Gideon Harcourt. You could have heard a pin. You could have heard, I think, the candles burning. He had done me a slight, the Duke went on, and his voice did not shake, and I understood that the not shaking was costing him more than any of us could measure. A small one. He had spoken carelessly of my father, newly dead, in company, at a time when I could bear nothing carelessly said of my father, because I had loved him and lost him and had no way to grieve except to grow hard. Harcourt spoke without malice. I know that now. I knew it then, if I am honest, and I have not been honest in 11 years. He spoke carelessly, as warm men do, and I answered it not with a word to his face, which a strong man would have done, but with a whisper in the dark, and another, until I had taken from him his credit and his friends and his good name, and in the end his life, for he died poor and alone in a northern town of the slow theft I had committed against him. And when men asked me in the early days whether I did not repent it, I told them I did not forgive, that forgiveness was a lie, that I had judged correctly and would do the same again. He paused. I told them that for 11 years. I told myself. I built a great cold house of it and lived in it and called the cold peace. He was not looking at Verity. He was looking at the room, at all of them, the whole avid poisonous ton that had come to watch him ruin a girl and was instead watching him do this. It was not peace, he said. It was cowardice. A strong man can bear to be wrong. I could not, because to be wrong once on a thing that mattered was to admit I might be wrong on everything, and I had made not being wrong the whole foundation of my life. So I could not repent Harcourt without the entire edifice coming down, and so I did not repent him, and I let a good and generous man lie 11 years in a pauper's grave with my whisper still on his name, because I was afraid. That is the truth of the Winter Duke, and you have all admired me for it, and it was fear the whole time. Somewhere in the room a woman was weeping. It was not Verity. Verity stood perfectly still, with her hand pressed hard to her own mouth, and her eyes enormous, and I do not think she breathed at all. I say this here, the Duke went on, in the room where I was first in 11 years corrected publicly and rightly by a person with nothing to gain and every reason to fear me, who did not fear me, and who told me the truth I had arranged my whole life never to hear. I say it because Gideon Harcourt's name has been spoken with a whisper attached to it for 11 years, and the whisper was mine, and I am here to take it back. It was a lie. There was no dishonesty in the man. There was only my pride and my grief and my cowardice, and I have let a good man's memory carry them for me long enough. He drew a breath. I have this day settled upon the family and dependents of Gideon Harcourt, upon everyone he ever helped, so far as I have been able to find them, the sum that his ruin cost the world and more. And I have endowed in his name in perpetuity the library he founded and I helped to break, and I have written to every man living who heard my whisper, to tell them it was false and that the falseness was mine. It will not give him back his life. Nothing will give him back his life. But it is the labor of judgment I refused for 11 years, and I find, having done it at last, that it is not weakness after all. It is only very late. And then, only then, he turned, and he found Verity across the crowded, silent room, and he looked at her, and he said the last of it to her alone, though the whole ton heard. You asked me at my own house what the 3 words were. I could not say them to you then. I could not have said them to any living soul, because I had never said them and did not know that I could. I have come here to say them, not to you. You are owed a great many things from me, but you are not owed this. This belongs to Harcourt, but I find I must say them to you also, because you are the one who taught me a man can say them and remain standing. He paused, and the whole of him, the whole cold winter of the man, stood bare in the candlelight. I was wrong. I was wrong about Harcourt, and I was wrong about strength, and I was wrong about myself, and I have been wrong for 11 years, and I am sorry. There. It did not kill me. You were right about that, too. He had not asked her for anything. Do you see? That is the part I have carried all these years, the part that made me, at last, able to bless it. He did not say marry me, or forgive me, or love me still. He had come to the great ball expecting to lose her, knowing he had lost her, that a woman does not unknow that a man killed her guardian. And he had done the whole thing anyway, the confession and the restitution and the 3 words, not to win her back but because she had shown him it was right, and a man who has learned to do the right thing does not then present the bill. He had made his amends to a dead man in front of the living, expecting nothing, and now he inclined his head to her, that same quarter-bow from the first night, the concession, made whole at last, and he turned to go, to walk out of the Thessaly rooms and out of her season and out of her life, having given her the one thing she had wanted from him and no claim upon her at all. And Verity Chase moved. I have thought about her walk across that floor more than I have thought about almost anything else in my life. She did not run. Verity never ran. She walked, with her spine straight and her plain, quick face streaming, straight across the middle of the Thessaly rooms under the great chandelier, through the whole silent starring ton, and every soul there parted before her without knowing they did it. And she reached him just as he turned, and she put out her hand, her bare hand. She had lost a glove somewhere and never noticed, and she took his, and stopped him so that he faced her. You have forgotten something, she said, and her voice was not steady but it carried. You said I was owed a great many things and not that one. You are mistaken, your grace, a breath, and you are mistaken again. He looked at her as though he did not dare understand. You are owed it most of all, she said, because you are the only man who ever answered me, and because Gideon Harcourt, who raised me, would sooner have seen a wrong repented than avenged, and because I am 26 and dowerless and have been told my whole life that I was too poor and too plain and too sharp to be chosen, and I have just watched the coldest man in England do the bravest thing I ever saw, in a room full of people who came to watch him be cruel. I forgot to hate you weeks ago, Julian. I have been ashamed of it every day since. I am not ashamed of it now." Her hand tightened on his. "I reached first, mark that. When you tell this story, and you will, cold men love to be told they have been warmed, you will say that in the end you did not ask and she reached first. I want it on the record. I have spent my whole life having nothing to give a man but my spine and my honesty, and I am giving them to you now, of my own choosing, in front of everyone, so that no one may ever say you claimed me, or bought me, or that the title cured a grudge. I chose. Do you understand me? I chose you." And the Winter Duke of Ravensmere, who had not wept in 11 years, who had built a duchy on the not weeping, put his other hand over her bare one, and bowed his head, not a quarter of an inch this time, but all the way, until his brow was near her fingers, and I saw the shoulders of the coldest man in England shake once, and heard him say, so low that I think only she and I and God caught it, "I understand you. I have understood you since the river. You reached first. It is on the record, verity, it is on the record." The Thessaly rooms did not know what to do. There was no precedent for it. The Tun had come to see a ruin and had been given a redemption instead, and it sat in the great gilded room like a scolded child, not knowing whether to applaud or to flee, and in the end it did the only thing left to it, which was to begin, awkwardly, in ones and twos, and then in a rush, to weep and to cheer. Even Lady Danvers, even, I saw, one of the gossips who had helped Lady Clarissa dig. Because there is in the hardest heart some old buried thing that answers to the sight of a proud man made humble by love, and a poor woman made a queen by her own choosing, and the Thessaly rooms answered to it that night whether it liked to or not. Only Lady Clarissa Vane did not weep. She stood at the edge of it with her lacquered beauty gone brittle, and after a moment she gathered her skirts and left, and I do not believe London much regarded her again. But she was not humbled by anyone's design, only quietly outlasted, which is the fate of people who mistake winning a room for winning a heart. I danced with Verity once, later that night, because she made him give me the first dance. "Edmund carried my shawl across the whole of London," she told the Duke, "and never once let me see that it cost him anything. You will give him the first dance, and you will be gracious about it, and one day you will know why I ask." And the Winter Duke, who was learning grace as fast as any man ever learned anything, gave it and was gracious, and I took Verity Chase out onto the floor of the Thessaly rooms and turned her under the light one time, and I said, "You are happy." "I am happy," she said. "Edmund, I am so sorry." "Don't be," I said, and found, to my surprise, that I half meant it. "I could love you. I did love you. But I could never answer you, Verity, and you have gone 20 years starving for an answer, and I would rather see you fed by him than starved by me. Only," and here my voice did betray me, "one small crack in it, only let me have the first dance, and let me be the friend who was there, and let me tell the story some day my own way." "Tell it your own way," she said, and pressed my hand, the friend's hand, the spaniel's hand, warm and sorry and true. "But tell it right. Tell them I reached first." "I have. Whenever I have told it in 11 years, I have told them she reached first. They were married quietly, out of respect for Harcourt, which the Tun found unaccountable, and I found exactly right. The library he founded stands endowed in his name to this day. I have seen it. There is a plate above the door that gives the whole truth, the slight and the whisper and the ruin and the restitution, because the Duke would not have it prettied. "I will not repent one lie by carving a comfortable one over the door," he said, and Verity said that was the most married thing he had ever uttered, and kissed him in front of the mason, which scandalized the mason very much. The Winter Duke thawed. That is the phrase London settled on, and it is not wrong, but it is not the whole of it, and I am old enough now to want the whole of it set down. London says a dowerless spinster, thawed the Winter Duke, as though she worked some soft feminine sorcery on him, some charm of the hearth. She did no such thing. She corrected his river and told him he was a coward, and put her clean finger on the oldest wound he had, and made him look at it, And he did the labor himself, the hard, cold, mortal labor of admitting at 40 that the whole architecture of his life had been fear in a good coat. She did not warm him. She dared him. And he found, when he took the dare, that he had been strong all along and had only spent it for 11 years on the wrong thing, on the not bending, when the truest strength there is, the one that costs the most and looks the most like weakness to a frightened man, is the strength to say I was wrong and remain standing and reach out your hand. He learned to reach out his hand, but she reached first. I want it on the record as she asked. Of all the great and glittering people in that room on that last night of the season, the beauties, the dukes, the tongues that ended reputations, it was the poorest and the plainest and the sharpest, the one they had all written off, who crossed the whole cold floor of the world and reached first and taught the rest of us, who thought we knew what strength was, that we had never seen it until we saw her walk. That is the story. I have told it at last the right way. She was chosen, yes, but only because she chose, and only after she had made a frozen man brave enough to be worth the choosing. And if you take one thing from an old friend who loved her and lost her and lived to be glad, let it be the thing she made me promise, the thing that is the whole marrow of the miracle I watched under the chandelier. The strongest person in the room is almost never the one you are afraid of. It is the one, so often overlooked, so easily written off, who is not afraid, who will tell you the river runs the other way and that you are wrong and that you can bear to be, and who, when the moment comes and the whole world is watching to see who will break, reaches first.